Thanks very much. Nice to see you all. I'm going to do what I did in 70,000 words on the table out there. If you're really interested in this whole story, it's there in quite heavy detail. In any case, a quick, what I hope will be a quick review of why at this point in history we as Americans generally remain confused about climate change, why this whole denial narrative still exists. And I want to start with this because I always like to start here. Those who think we are powerless to do anything about the greenhouse effect forget about the White House effect. As president, I intend to do something about it. I often do this as a quiz and ask people who they think did it, and nobody ever gets the person I like to refer to as the smarter George Bush. This was 1988. No, it was 88. Where am I thinking 88? It should be 88. It was. I know it says 89, but I wrote that and it should be 88.
He's a Canadian.
So that was, but a very keen student of America. So that was the Republican president's position in 1988. Not only was climate change happening, he was going to fix it. The scientific basis for the greenhouse effect and the potential impact of human emissions of greenhouse gases such as CO2 on climate is well established and cannot be denied. This is the senior scientist at Mobil Corporation. This was written in a piece that was commissioned by the Global Climate Coalition, which was a coalition of big greenhouse gas, mostly fossil fuel companies, major fossil fuel dependent manufacturers, all kinds of other manufacturers. And they began around 89 and worked through the 90s to try to undermine policy on on global warming issues. They commissioned this study in 1995, and Leonard Bernstein was the lead on the study, and they said, okay, what can we say about climate change to sow confusion? And he came back and said, well established and cannot be denied. They took that report, they stuck it in a drawer where it stayed until last year. It leaked out. Somebody gave it a copy to Andy Revkin at the New York Times. So. In 1988, the Republican president got it, was worried about it. At the same time, Maggie Thatcher, then the Prime Minister of the UK, the very right of center Reagan-esque Prime Minister, was setting up the Hadley Institute for Climate Studies. 1995, the industry, the oil industry, got there and couldn't deny it, and yet. Here we are, 2006. The number of Americans who believe in climate change, and even that word is kind of funny, was only 79%. Only 50% of the people believed that humans were responsible. That was 4 years ago. This is the news today for anybody who's watching. Have I got 1995 there again? Sorry, should be 2010. I'm a little sleep deprived. Sorry. This is 2010, I promise. I'm going to fire the guy who wrote these slides. Between 2006 and 2010, it went down from 79% to 59%, and the number of people who thought that humans were responsible went from 50 to 34. This is probably review for a bunch of you, but I can never get enough of being astonished by that fact. So how did this happen? It happened because a very professional, very sophisticated, extraordinarily well-financed, and completely determined group of people have spent the last 2 decades trying to get us to not understand what's happened. I'm going to go through just a couple of quick things. The Western Fuels Association in 1991 invented something called the Information Council on the Environment. This was the first strategy document that we have found that fully laid out a plan to get people to either not believe in climate change or to think that it might be a good thing. They focus grouped a bunch of messages and came up with a bunch of newspaper advertisements, of which here are a couple of examples. Who told you the earth was warming? Chicken Little? They ran these in mostly small communities that were coal-fired power plant dependent. Some say the earth is warming, some also said the earth was flat. This is my favorite. If the earth is getting warmer, why is Kentucky getting colder? It's my favorite because I love the donkey, but it's also my favorite because it's not true. Kentucky was not getting warmer or getting colder. They ran it on a cold day, but Kentucky was getting warmer at a rate faster than the globe was getting warmer. But when they hired the DC PR firm to test these messages, they weren't testing them for accuracy. They were testing them for efficacy. They were testing them to see if we would believe it. Hmm?
Yeah.
90. They were 91, 92. How much are we willing to pay to solve a problem that may not exist? This is the same old doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the general public and also the means of establishing controversy. This is an old Brown and Williamson tobacco quote from the 60s. If you read Naomi Oreskes' new book, Merchants of Doubt, and I really recommend that you do, it's a fabulous book. She documents the sort of denial campaign from '89 forward in an extraordinarily careful way.
Naomi who?
Naomi Oreskes. It's Oreskes. And she's a science historian from the University of California at San Diego. Merchants of Doubt, it's called. Really good book. She talks about Hill and Knowlton talking to the tobacco industry in the early 50s and saying, you know, all the science about tobacco, very inconvenient for your industry, but it's not absolutely certain. So let's start to talk about that doubt. Let's in fact spend the next 40 years talking about that doubt. And they did spend 40 years. In 1992, after the Western Fuels Association guys got caught, Philip Morris hired APCO Worldwide to come up with a campaign called the Advancement of Sound Science Coalition. Does everybody know what an AstroTurf group is? You know, fake grassroots organization. This is one of the granddaddies of the AstroTurf groups. APCO told Philip Morris, nobody believes you anymore. You need to, you can no longer say that tobacco might not be harmful and have anyone believe you. But if we were able to round up a whole bunch of independent scientists, arm's length scientists, into a grassroots organization that talked about the doubt that exists in all science, perhaps we could undermine people's faith in science to the degree that they wouldn't believe any scientist about anything, and that would serve the tobacco industry. They did this, and again, I'm running through these as quickly. The documents are all available on the internet at this point, thanks to the tobacco lawsuits and thanks to Stanton Glantz at the University of California at San Francisco. But this gives you a very specific idea of what their objectives were: to establish TASC as a credible source for reporters when questioning the validity of scientific studies, to encourage the public to question from the grassroots up the validity of scientific studies. You can read all of this document, and in no place can you find anything where they actually reference science, doing research, taking anything about science seriously. They're just questioning the validity of science. They got caught just as the Western Fuels Association got caught. So the American Petroleum Institute hired the executive director of TASC, who was then Steve Malloy, the junk science commentator who you can today see on Fox News. And they did a campaign, a whole strategy document. By this point, this was getting really evil. Evil is a judgmental, value-laden word. Really sophisticated. They were saying things like, you know, we'll find scientists who will say what we want. We'll hire them. We will media train them. We will write opinion page pieces on their behalf. When a newspaper runs a story saying climate change is a problem, we'll phone them and say, you know, you have a scientist that says this is a problem, but we have a scientist that says it's not. Janet's already made reference to this. They went to the point of telling people not to bug reporters in big cities, because most often you would wind up with people who actually had you'd get a beat reporter who might actually have read some science. They said, pick the mid-sized markets, pick the small and mid-sized papers, because there you're going to get some 22-year-old general assignment reporter who's going to be dazzled by the PhD and oblivious to the fact that the PhD is in geology and not atmospheric science. And that'll be all you need. So this, they said victory will be achieved when media coverage, and this again, documents available on the internet, media coverage recognizes balance on climate science and the recognition of the validity of viewpoints that challenge the current conventional wisdom. This whole, one from one side, one from the other side. Anybody who's seen An Inconvenient Truth? How many? Few? I'll roar through this. Al Gore did this in that movie. Naomi Oreskes again, same woman in a 2004 article that she wrote for a piece that she did in Nature, in Science rather. She looked back over the preceding 10 years and found 928 science articles dealing with global climate change, 0% of which took issue with the underlying science. During the same period, the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times had, among them, 636 stories on climate change. In 53% of those cases, they'd done on the one hand, on the other hand treatment. In a further 9% of the cases, they'd only quoted an expert saying that climate change wasn't happening. So, I mean, how can we not be confused? And here, one of the things that I always like to say is, because I get kind of cranky about this, and people leave with the impression that I think that all climate change deniers are wretched people. And that's not true. I mean, Dr. S. Fred Singer is a wretched person. Pat Michaels is a wretched person. Dick Lindzen is a deeply disturbed guy who should be removed from any science. I mean, yes, there are real villains in this in the mix here, but there are a lot of people who are extraordinarily well read who are just reading the wrong stuff. They are reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, and they're coming away with a sincere, and they think well-established, well-founded doubt that climate change is all that clear. They didn't get there accidentally. They got there because wretched people led them there by the nose. But you can't think that because somebody is wildly wrong on this subject that they are also people of ill will. You have to understand, I think, that they're just wrong. They don't need approbation or disapprobation. They need help. I don't even know where I was going to go from here. Oh, the Tea Party. I'm not sure if I have to do this either. But in terms of, and again, this is a last comment about AstroTurf groups. The best kind of an AstroTurf group is one that has fetid roots but lively grass. And that, I think, perfectly describes the Tea Party, because Americans for Prosperity set this up. The Koch brothers paid for it, they organized the whole movement, but all manner of people of goodwill, again, some who were pretty wrong-headed, but people who were sincere and, although badly informed, well-intentioned, joined the Tea Party movement, really thinking that they were part of a legitimate grassroots organization. And they're not. And the whole thing is just being extraordinarily badly reported. The people who are behind it, it's well documented that they're behind it. They've spent huge amounts of money. But if this story gets out effectively enough, if we begin to understand, if the broader community begins to understand how corrupt and how manipulative this campaign has been for 20 years, I think the Proposition 23 campaign in California demonstrates that people, when they understand this issue, do the right thing and vote against whatever's going wrong. Proposition 23 fell in large part because in the campaign in California, people came quickly to understand that the people who were supporting Proposition 23 were the Koch brothers through Flint Hills Resources, the $1 million. And their ability to hijack that election was stopped because people caught them, said they're playing dirty and we cannot stand for that, and they backed off, and I think a very good result came of it. So the truth will not necessarily out all by itself, but the truth, if we can get it out, will set us free. think. Here's my, everybody loves this polar bear. This is, you see this polar bear all the time because this comes from the Al Gore slide set, or that's where I got it. Al Gore's got this 1,000 slide sets that you can get if you've done the Al Gore training, as I have. And it has a whole bunch of, like, many dozens of pictures of horrible things, including animals in distress. This is a charismatic megafauna in the scientific parlance. This is the only one of all of those pictures that is in fact funny. So it's my favorite. I'm happy to take all kinds of questions about this.
Let's take two. And then we'll go to Steve, and then we'll come back for more questions.
One at the back.
So I was recently reading your book, Climate Cover-Up, and I was starting to look at the different groups, the names, and starting to really try and tie that onto articles and places that I was reading elsewhere. One of which, the Heartland Institute, that you challenge very specifically, and they're peer-reviewed, and they just came out with an article, I don't know if you've seen it recently, talking about their challenge of the IPCC's, how not their actual science, but how they go about coming to their results, which is their like big peer-reviewed article. But then they go and talk about the Oregon petition right after that. Like, don't believe that. Listen to this 31,000 scientists. So I was wondering how you felt about now how they're starting to change their approach, not attacking the actual science where they didn't have peer-reviewed efforts, to now challenging the methods that we go about coming out with science, where they can have peer-reviewed and more of an effort.
What I think you'll find in terms of their campaign, and one of the really wonderfully effective things about their campaign, is that they haven't stopped the other attack. Each time they open up a new line of attack, and in fact, each time a line of attack is completely discredited, they still don't stop. You know, it's not like they go, oh gosh, we were caught. We won't do that again. They just keep doing it, and in terms of the Oregon petition, it's a terrible, terrible piece of work. It's been debunked. The Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine is a barn in Oregon, run by a guy whose other job is putting out learn at home guides that are based on the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica. I mean, it's really, this is not fine science. So they've created a petition that now has 30-odd thousand names. And the basis of that petition, by the way, if you don't know the story, Fred Seitz, who in 1989 was dismissed by the tobacco industry as being too old and senile to offer reasonable comment, and I have that, I'll show you the memo that from Philip Morris on that if you like. In 1999, his signature was used on a letter a letter of solicitation to begin this petition. They wrote it up on National Academy of Sciences letterhead, because Fred Seitz in the 60s had been a president of the National Academy of Sciences. And they added an apparently a journal article by what's his name from the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine, which called the science of climate change into question, and they set up that particular article to look like it had appeared in the Journal of the National Academy of Science, and they sent it out to like 20,000 people, and that's where that petition came from, and it's still it absolutely will not go away.
It's mostly doctors.
No, well, they said it was mostly doctors, but it was not. I mean, when somebody did an analysis of it, it was mostly people who almost got through their BSc, which all power to it. I'm not a scientist, so I don't want to say anything badly about anybody who studied science in university. But someone who studied science in university as opposed to James Hansen, I'm going with James Hansen every time. But the attack on the IPCC, they're just going to keep doing that because they've enjoyed some real success in the last year, as we know. So, and then Ron Jack.
Do you find some hope in the fact that public opinion is so wonderfully malleable here? A few years ago, most Americans believed in climate change, and it understand or at least believe that anthropomorphic climate change is a large part of it. A few years later, after not a hell of a lot of money, a few $1 million and a lot of op-eds and the campaign by folks like the Koch brothers, those things have flipped. So it's not rocket science persuading people to change their opinions. Don't you find that a source of hope?
I would argue it's not a hell of a lot of money because I think that it's been significant investment. They have had a couple of big wins. The ClimateGate thing last year was stunning. I'm not sure. I try to be hopeful because I have children, and I'm frankly frightened to death about the state of, when you look at, I got a slide set from a guy named Mark Jacquard this week, who is one of the most credible energy economists in the world right now, I think, and he was showing different trajectories of CO2 emissions, and they were up, way up, and the bottom trajectory, which he had labeled, this is where we should be headed, was going to 650 parts per million. And we're missing 650 parts per million by a wide margin, and he's saying that should be the goal. No, it shouldn't. In any case, I think the Pearl Harbor moment, we missed the Pearl Harbor moment with Katrina. I am optimistic that people will start to put together all of the remarkable things that have been happening lately, which show observable, very frightening, observable evidence of the change. That if we begin, begin to message this more effectively, that a sufficient minority of people, and I don't think we need 50% plus one. I think we need 30 or 34% of people who are really passionate, who understand it absolutely, are passionate and are committed to modeling good behavior themselves. I think that would push us over the edge, push us into a much better world very quickly. So I think there's room for optimism. I'm not overflowing with it this afternoon.